Living in a small town means everyone knows everyone's business, or at least they think they do. My name is Caleb Martin, and until recently, I believed my life was one of those open books. My wife, Lila, and I had built a life that felt almost idyllic. A cozy 2-story house with a wraparound porch, weekend hikes in the nearby woods, and Friday night dinners at the diner where the waitstaff knew our names. We'd been married for 8 years, and if you'd asked me a month ago, I would have said we were happy. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but who doesn't? She worked at the local library, and I ran a small landscaping business. Our days were simple, our nights quieter still. At least they had been. The first letter arrived on a crisp October morning, tucked into my mailbox between the water bill and a flyer for discounted car repairs. It was unmarked, with no return address, just my name scrawled in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper with 3 words, written in black ink. "She's lying to you." First, I laughed it off. I figured it was some prank. Kids with too much time on their hands. But something about the letter nagged at me. Maybe it was the precise way each letter had been penned, or the fact that the envelope smelled faintly of smoke. Still, I didn't say anything to Lila. What was there to say? A week later, the second letter came. This one was more direct. Ask her about the man at the coffee shop. My stomach sank when I read it. Lila had mentioned meeting a client from the library's outreach program at the coffee shop downtown. I'd shrugged it off at the time. What harm could there be in a meeting over coffee? But now, the seed of doubt had been planted. I started paying closer attention to her schedule. On Tuesdays, she stayed late at the library for book club. On Fridays, she claimed she was sorting through inventory in the back office. Each excuse seemed plausible, yet they piled up like loose threads begging to be pulled. The third letter wasn't a letter at all. It was a photograph. Lila, laughing at a corner table in the very coffee shop the letter had mentioned. Her head was tilted slightly, her smile radiant. Across from her sat a man I didn't recognize. Dark-haired, broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who looked like he could charm his way out of a speeding ticket. I wanted to confront her then and there, but something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the hope that I was wrong. Instead, I tucked the photo back into its envelope and hid it in the bottom drawer of my desk. That night, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, Lila's laugh rang out, filling the room. She reached across to steal a fry from my plate, her blue eyes sparkling under the soft glow of the kitchen lights. I smiled back, but inside, I was already planning my next move. I had to know the truth. The next morning, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me like a dense fog. The photograph from the anonymous letter played on a loop in my mind. Lila's easy smile, the way she leaned ever so slightly toward the man at the table. There was a familiarity in her posture, a kind of intimacy that didn't belong in a casual conversation. I decided I needed answers, but I couldn't go charging in without a plan. If there was one thing living in this small town had taught me, it was that the truth has a way of slipping through the cracks unless you're deliberate. So I began to strategize, my landscaper's instincts kicking in. Just like designing a garden, I dig carefully, layer by layer, until I uncovered the roots. It started with subtle questions. Over breakfast, I casually asked Lila how things were going at the library. She brushed some crumbs off her sleeve and smiled at me over her coffee mug. "Same as always," she said, her tone light. "Still keeping up with the book club on Tuesdays?" I pressed, watching for any flicker of hesitation. Her response was seamless, her expression unreadable. "Of course. I swear, those ladies could talk about Pride and Prejudice for years and never get tired of it." I nodded, but the answer did little to settle my unease. If she was lying, she was good at it. Too good. By the time I got to work that day, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to ask her outright, at least not yet. I needed proof. So I called in a favor from my buddy Paul, who ran a private security business. He owed me one after I'd helped him landscape his office courtyard last summer. "Hey, Caleb," Paul greeted me, his voice gruff but warm. "What can I do for you?" I hesitated, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "I need to find out what my wife's been up to," I said finally, lowering my voice as if the walls of my truck might betray me. Discreetly, Paul didn't ask questions. That's the thing about small-town friends. You learn to trust each other without always needing the details. "I've got some surveillance equipment," he said after a beat. "Cameras, GPS trackers. You sure you want to go down this road?" "I'm sure," I replied, though my heart clenched as I said it. Was I really ready to uncover what might be lurking in the shadows? That night, while Lila slept peacefully beside me, I crept out to her car and installed the GPS tracker Paul had lent me. It felt wrong, intrusive even, but the fear of the unknown outweighed my guilt. I needed to know where she was going during those late nights at the library. The first couple of days brought no surprises. According to the tracker, Lila's car stayed parked at the library on Tuesday and Friday evenings, just as she said it would. But on the third day, everything changed. It was a Thursday evening, and I just finished cleaning up after dinner when my phone buzzed. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and pulled the phone from my pocket. The GPS app had sent me a notification. Lila's car had left the library and was heading toward the far side of town. My heart pounded as I watched the little blue dot move across the map, finally coming to a stop outside a place I knew all too well, the Broadleaf Cafe. I grabbed my jacket and keys, barely pausing to turn off the kitchen lights before heading out the door. The drive to the cafe felt both endless and instantaneous, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe she was meeting a friend. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Or maybe I parked a block away and approached on foot, keeping to the shadows. Through the cafe's large windows, I could see her almost immediately. Lila sat at a small table near the back, the same man from the photograph seated across from her. They were laughing, their heads tilted close together in a way that screamed anything but casual. My stomach churned as I took in the scene, my hands balling into fists at my sides. For a moment, I considered walking in and confronting her right then and there, but something stopped me. The anonymous letters had warned me, but they hadn't prepared me for this. The sharp sting of betrayal cutting through the heart of the life we'd built together. I needed more than this fleeting glimpse. I snapped a photo with my phone and retreated, my mind a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite name. Back in my truck, I stared at the image on my screen, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. The question wasn't just what Lila was hiding. It was why and how far it would go. The following day, the image of Lila and the man at the cafe burned in my mind like a brand. I couldn't focus at work. The rhythmic hum of the mower and the scent of freshly cut grass couldn't drown out the storm inside me. Every laugh, every moment Lila and I had shared, felt tainted now, fragile like glass under pressure. After finishing a landscaping job for Mrs. Hilson, one of my longtime clients, I climbed into my truck and stared at the dashboard. My phone sat in the cup holder, the photo of Lila and her mystery companion just a swipe away. I was tempted to call her, to demand an explanation, but what would I say? What could she say to make any of this feel right again? Instead, I called Paul. "Hey," I said when he answered. "Can you dig a little deeper?" He didn't need me to explain. "I can run a background check on the guy," he offered. "Might take a couple of days." "Thanks," I muttered, barely able to get the words out. Paul's calm, professional tone was a stark contrast to the chaos in my chest. When I got home that evening, Lila was already there, humming to herself as she set the table for dinner. She looked up and smiled as I walked in, her expression so warm and genuine it made my stomach churn. "Hey Han," she said. "How was your day?" "Busy," I replied, forcing a smile. "Yours?" "Oh, the usual," she said breezily, setting down a plate of roast chicken. "Had to sort through some donations for the library, but I'm finally making progress on that inventory backlog." The ease with which she lied stunned me. If I hadn't seen her at the cafe the night before, I would have believed her without a second thought. Sitting across from her at the dinner table, I tried to engage in our usual small talk, but my mind kept drifting. Every laugh, every shared glance felt like a performance. Was this how she always acted when she was hiding something? After dinner, she disappeared upstairs to take a shower, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos again, this time noticing the little details I'd missed in my initial haze of anger. The man's hand was resting on the table, just inches from Lila's. The way she leaned forward, her smile soft and intimate. It wasn't the way you looked at a casual acquaintance. It was the way you looked at someone who made your heart race. That night, as Lila slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her even breaths filled the room, but my thoughts were anything but calm. Who was this man? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, why hadn't I seen it before? The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Paul. Got a name for you. Eric Dalton. Owns the hardware store in town. Used to be on the city council. Digging deeper now, will update soon. Eric Dalton. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Everyone in town knew Eric. Successful, charming, always quick with a joke. He was the kind of guy people gravitated toward, the kind of guy who made you feel like the center of the universe when he talked to you. I'd seen him at the cafe, the hardware store, even a couple of town meetings. Never once had it crossed my mind that he might be anything more than a passing acquaintance to Lila. But now, with the photo in hand and Paul's confirmation, it was clear there was more to the story. That evening, I decided to test the waters. Hey, I said casually as Lila set down her wine glass after dinner. You hear anything about Eric Dalton lately? Her hand froze for the briefest moment before she picked up her fork. Eric? No, why? I shrugged, pretending to focus on my plate. Saw him at the cafe the other day. He's always so busy. Must be tough running a business and being so involved in the community. Her smile was tight, her eyes darting to her wine glass. Yeah, I guess so. That hesitation, fleeting but undeniable, confirmed what I'd already begun to suspect. She was hiding something, and Eric Dalton was at the center of it. But what I couldn't figure out was why. Why Eric? Why now? As Lila excused herself to take another phone call, I sat alone at the table, the pieces of the puzzle scattered in my mind. The letters, the cafe meeting, the lie about her evening plans. They were all threads in a larger tapestry, and I was determined to unravel it. Over the next few days, I watched Lila closely, looking for any crack in her polished facade. She carried on as if nothing had changed, making breakfast, chatting about her day, laughing at my jokes. But now, everything she did felt rehearsed, like she was playing a role in some elaborate charade. Paul called with another update. Eric Dalton's clean on paper, he said. No criminal record, no financial troubles. But here's the kicker, he's got a reputation. Been linked to a couple of affairs before, though nothing ever went public. Small-town rumors, you know how it is. I clenched my jaw, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. Anything else? There's one more thing, Paul said, his tone hesitant. Eric's hardware store has a back office. He's been known to use it for personal meetings after hours. You might want to check that out. That evening, while Lila was upstairs folding laundry, I paced the living room, debating my next move. If Eric was using his office as a rendezvous spot, it wouldn't be hard to confirm. But confronting Lila without solid evidence felt like walking into battle unarmed. The following day, I decided to take action. I drove past the hardware store around 8 p.m., the streets quiet under the amber glow of the streetlights. Eric's truck was parked in its usual spot, but the store looked dark. My gut told me to stick around. I parked down the street and waited, my pulse racing with every passing minute. At 8:30, another car pulled up, Lila's. She stepped out, glancing around nervously before slipping through the side entrance of the store. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. This was it. The confirmation I'd been dreading. I forced myself to wait, watching the minutes tick by on the dashboard clock. At 9:15, Lila reemerged, her face flushed and her hair slightly tousled. Eric followed a moment later, his hand brushing her arm in a way that felt far too intimate. I snapped a photo with my phone, the image sharp and incriminating. As they parted ways, Lila heading back to her car and Eric locking up the store, I felt a wave of anger crash over me, followed by a hollow ache in my chest. When I got home, Lila was already there, seated on the couch with a book in her lap. She looked up as I walked in, her smile warm and disarming. "Hey, Han. How was your day?" I couldn't bring myself to respond. The sight of her, so composed and unaffected, made my stomach churn. "Fine," I said curtly, heading straight for the shower. Under the stream of hot water, I let the weight of everything hit me. The anonymous letters, the cafe meetings, the lie about her evening plans. It all pointed to one undeniable truth. The woman I'd built my life with, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was keeping secrets. And I wasn't sure I wanted to hear them. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Lila humming in the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the air, but it did little to soothe the turmoil inside me. As I sat across from her at the breakfast table, I realized I couldn't keep pretending. The time had come to confront her, to lay the truth bare. "Lila," I said, my voice steady but firm. "We need to talk." She looked up from her plate, her smile faltering at the tone in my voice. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "I know about Eric." The color drained from her face, her fork clattering against her plate. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice shaky. "Don't lie to me," I said, pulling out my phone and placing the photo on the table. Her eyes widened as she stared at the image, her hands trembling. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. "Then what is it?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like what I think it is." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavy between us. For the first time, I realized the truth wasn't just in her actions. It was in her inability to deny them. Lila stared at the photo on the table, her face a mixture of shock and guilt. The tears in her eyes spilled over, but she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. "Caleb, please, let me explain," she whispered. "Explain what?" I shot back, my voice laced with bitterness. "Explain why you're sneaking around with Eric Dalton? Explain why you've been lying to me for weeks." Her hands trembled as she reached for mine, but I pulled away, the sting of her betrayal too fresh. "It's not what you think," she said again, her voice cracking. "I swear it's not." "Then tell me," I demanded. "Because I'm out of patience, Lila. You've been lying, and I deserve to know the truth." She hesitated, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came out. The silence stretched between us, each second an eternity. Finally, she dropped her gaze, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "It's not an affair," she said softly. "At least, not in the way you think." I felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by suspicion. "What does that even mean?" She took a deep breath, her hands twisting together in her lap. "Eric and we've been meeting because I needed someone to talk to. Someone who understands." "Understands what?" I asked, my tone sharp. "Why couldn't you talk to me?" "Because it's about you," she blurted out, her voice rising. "It's about us, Caleb. Our marriage. Everything we've been through." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process what she was saying. "So you confided in Eric?" I said, the bitterness creeping back into my voice. "You chose him over me?" "It wasn't like that," she said, shaking her head. "I wasn't looking for anything romantic. He listened. He gave me advice. And yes, I know it was wrong to keep it from you, but I didn't want to hurt you." "Too late for that," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "And what kind of advice does Eric Dalton have to offer that you couldn't get from your own husband?" Her silence was damning. She looked away, her cheeks flushing with shame. "Lila," I said, my voice cold and steady. "You don't spend weeks sneaking off to meet someone just for advice. And you don't lie to your husband unless there's something more going on." She opened her mouth to protest but stopped herself. The truth was written all over her face, even if she couldn't say it out loud. "Do you have feelings for him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes filled with fresh tears as she shook her head. "I don't know," she admitted. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I felt so alone, Caleb. Like we've been drifting apart." "Drifting apart?" I repeated, the words cutting through me like a blade. "And instead of talking to me about it, you went to Eric? You betrayed me, Lila." "I didn't mean to," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I swear, I didn't." I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I need some air," I said, grabbing my keys from the counter. "We'll talk about this later." "Caleb, wait," she pleaded, rising from her seat. "Please, don't walk away." But I couldn't stay. Not now. Not with the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a vice. I walked out the door without another word, the sound of her sobs echoing behind me. The air outside was crisp and cool, but it did little to calm the storm inside me. I climbed into my truck and started driving, the road stretching out before me like an escape route. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. As the miles passed, my thoughts churned, a chaotic mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal. I kept replaying her words in my mind. I felt so alone. Had I missed something? Had I failed her in some way? Or was this just her excuse for crossing a line she couldn't uncross? My phone buzzed in the cup holder, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Paul. "Got more info on Eric. Might want to see this in person. Call me." I stared at the message, my mind racing. Whatever Paul had found, it felt like the next piece of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. But if there was one thing I knew for certain, it was this. I couldn't stop now. I needed the whole truth, no matter how much it hurt. I pulled into the parking lot of Paul's office, my truck's tires crunching over the gravel. The small brick building was unassuming, tucked away on the outskirts of town, but it had become the epicenter of my unraveling life. As I killed the engine, I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever bombshell Paul was about to drop. When I walked inside, Paul was waiting for me in his cluttered office. He gestured for me to sit, his expression grim. "Thanks for coming," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. "You're going to want to see this." I hesitated before picking up the folder, my heart pounding in my chest. The first page was a printout of bank records, Eric Dalton's. My eyes scanned the highlighted entries. Frequent cash withdrawals, purchases at high-end restaurants, and several charges from a boutique hotel just outside of town. "What am I looking at?" I asked, my voice tight. Paul leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "It's a pattern," he said. "Eric's been known to wine and dine women he's involved with. But that's not all." He flipped to the next page, revealing a series of text message logs. "These are from Lila's phone. I managed to pull them using the software you installed." My stomach twisted as I read the messages. They started innocently enough, small talk about books and local events. But as I flipped through the pages, the tone shifted. The messages grew more personal, more intimate. Eric complimenting her beauty. Lila thanking him for making her feel seen. I slammed the folder shut, my hands trembling. "So it's real," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "She's been cheating on me." Paul's expression softened. "I don't know if it's physical, Caleb, but emotionally, yeah, it's crossed a line." I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "Thanks, Paul," I muttered, turning toward the door. "Wait," he said, stopping me. "There's one more thing." I turned back, my chest tight with dread. Paul hesitated before sliding a photograph across the desk. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but the subjects were unmistakable. Lila and Eric, standing in the parking lot of the boutique hotel. His hand rested on her lower back, their faces inches apart. I stared at the photo, my world crumbling around me. "When was this taken?" I managed to ask. 3 days ago, Paul said. "Late afternoon." I nodded numbly, clutching the folder and photo as I walked out of the office. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with a mix of anger and despair. The photo was the final nail in the coffin, the undeniable proof I'd been dreading. When I got home, Lila was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up and smiled, but her expression faltered when she saw the look on my face. "Caleb?" she asked, setting down the knife. "What's wrong?" I tossed the folder onto the counter, the photo sliding out and landing face up. Her eyes widened as she stared at it, her hand flying to her mouth. "I gave you a chance to tell me the truth," I said, my voice low and steady. "But you lied, over and over again." "Caleb, she began, her voice trembling. "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't insult me with more lies. I know everything, Lila. The messages, the meetings, the hotel." Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. "It wasn't what it looks like," she pleaded. "I swear I never." "You never what?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the kitchen. "You never slept with him? You never thought about it? You never betrayed me?" She flinched at my words, her sobs growing louder. "I was lost," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't." "But you did," I said coldly. "You made a choice, Lila. You chose him over me, over us." She collapsed onto the floor, her cries racking her body. But I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. The weight of her betrayal was too much, the wound too deep. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her there, broken and sobbing. For the first time in my life, I didn't know if we could find our way back to each other, or if I even wanted to. I spent the night in the truck, parked at the edge of a field just outside town. The stars above were brilliant, scattered across the black sky like diamonds. But their beauty felt hollow, a cruel mockery of the chaos inside me. I couldn't bring myself to go home. Not yet. The thought of facing Lila, of seeing her tear-streaked face and hearing more excuses, was too much to bear. Sleep didn't come. I sat there for hours, staring into the darkness, replaying every moment of our marriage. The laughter, the arguments, the promises we'd made on our wedding day. It all felt so distant now, like a life that belonged to someone else. By the time the sun began to rise, I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. I had to go back and figure out what came next, whether we could salvage anything from the wreckage or if this was the end of the road. When I walked through the front door, the house was eerily quiet. Lila was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a blanket draped over her. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Caleb," she said softly, sitting up, "can we talk?" I didn't respond right away. I hung my jacket on the coat rack and leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "Talk," I said flatly. She took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I know I've hurt you," she began, "and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to understand. I never meant to fall for him." My stomach churned at her words, but I forced myself to stay quiet. Let her talk, I told myself.
Let her grave.
"I didn't go looking for this," she continued. "It started out innocent, just conversations, venting about things I didn't know how to say to you. And then, I don't know, somewhere along the way it changed. I didn't realize it until it was too late." "You didn't realize it?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "You didn't realize sneaking around and meeting him at a hotel might cross a line?" She flinched, fresh tears welling up in her eyes. "I know how it looks," she said, "and I hate myself for it. But I swear, Caleb, I never slept with him. It never got that far." "And I'm supposed to believe that?" I asked, my tone icy. "After everything I've seen? After all the lies?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice trembling. I don't want to lose you. I love you, Caleb. I do. I know I've messed up, but I want to fix this. I want to fix us." Her words hung in the air, a desperate plea that felt like both a lifeline and a weight dragging me down. Part of me wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that we could repair the damage. But another part, the part that felt the sting of her betrayal like a knife to the gut, couldn't see a way forward. "Why him?" I asked after a long silence. "Out of everyone, why Eric?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor. "He made me feel seen," she said finally. Like I wasn't just a wife or a librarian or someone's everything but myself. He listened. He didn't judge. And I know that doesn't excuse anything, but that's the truth. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You think I didn't see you? That I didn't care? I've been here, Lila, every single day. But you didn't give me a chance. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she tried to respond, but I cut her off. I don't know if I can do this, I said, my voice cracking. I don't know if I can trust you again. And without trust, what's left? She sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. I felt the ache in my chest deepen, but I forced myself to turn away. I needed space, time to think, to figure out if I could find it in myself to forgive her, or if it was too late. As I walked out of the room, her muffled cries followed me, echoing through the house like a haunting melody. The days that followed were a blur of silence and distance. Lila and I moved around the house like ghosts, careful not to cross paths. The once familiar rhythms of our life had been shattered, replaced by an unbearable tension that hung in the air like a storm cloud. I spent most of my time outside, throwing myself into work. Landscaping had always been therapeutic for me, a way to quiet my mind and find order in the chaos. But now, even the hum of the mower and the scent of freshly turned soil couldn't drown out the thoughts swirling in my head. Lila stayed inside, her presence reduced to the faint sounds of her movements. Water running in the kitchen, the creak of the stairs, the muffled hum of the TV late at night. I wondered what she was thinking, if she was hurting as much as I was, or if she was already pulling away, preparing to leave. One evening, as I sat on the porch nursing a beer, my phone buzzed. It was Paul. "I've got something you need to hear," he said without preamble. "Can you meet me at my office?" I hesitated, the weight of everything pressing down on me. "Yeah," I said finally. "I'll be there in 20. When I arrived, Paul was waiting for me, a serious look on his face. He gestured for me to sit and pushed a small recorder across the desk. This was from a conversation Eric had yesterday. One of my guys caught it. I pressed play, the knot in my stomach tightening as Eric's voice crackled through the speakers. "She's pulling back," he said. "I think she's feeling guilty, but I've got her. She needs me now. It's just a matter of time before she realizes she can't go back to him." My hands clenched into fists as the recording continued. "What if she doesn't leave her husband?" another voice asked. "She will," Eric replied confidently. "She's already halfway out the door. He's just a placeholder now." I stopped the recording, my chest heaving with anger. Paul watched me carefully, his expression unreadable. "He's manipulating her," I said through gritted teeth. "He's playing her, and she doesn't even see it." "Maybe," Paul said cautiously, "but she's still the one who let him in." The truth of his words stung, but I couldn't deny them. Lila had made her choices, and no amount of Eric's smooth talk could absolve her of that. But hearing his arrogance, his calculated manipulation, ignited something in me, a resolve I hadn't felt in days. "I need to talk to her," I said, standing abruptly. "She needs to hear this." Paul nodded, handing me a copy of the recording. "Good luck, Caleb." When I got home, Lila was in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. She looked up as I entered, her eyes wary. "We need to talk," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. She nodded, turning off the TV. "Okay." I sat across from her, pulling out the recorder and placing it on the coffee table. "I want you to listen to this," I said, hitting play. As Eric's voice filled the room, I watched her face closely. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock, her hands flying to her mouth as the weight of his words sank in. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. "He's lying," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's not, he wouldn't." "Don't defend him," I snapped, cutting her off. "You heard what he said, Lila. He doesn't care about you. He's using you." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she shook her head. "I didn't know," she sobbed. "I didn't know he felt that way." "And what about you?" I demanded. "What were you feeling? Did you think about me?" About us. I was stupid, she said, her voice breaking. I was lonely and confused, and I let him get too close. But I swear, Caleb, I never stopped loving you. I stared at her, the anger and hurt warring inside me. I don't know if I can believe you, I said finally. Not after everything. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away, the distance between us growing even as she begged for forgiveness. I need time, I said, standing. I can't do this right now. She nodded, her sobs quieting as I walked away. But this time I didn't leave the house. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the recorder, wondering if there was anything left to salvage, or if this was the beginning of the end. The house was heavy with silence the next morning. Lila and I avoided each other, moving through the space like strangers. Her tears from the night before had dried, but the ache in her eyes lingered. As for me, I felt hollow. The recording had shattered any illusions I'd been clinging to, and now all that remained were questions. What had drawn her to Eric? Was it just my shortcomings? Or was there something broken in her that I'd never noticed? I needed answers, not the kind that came from pleading or confrontation, but the kind that came from clarity. So I did something I'd never done before. I took a day off work. No clients, no landscaping, no distractions. Just me, my truck, and the open road. I drove aimlessly for hours, the town shrinking in my rearview mirror as I ventured into the countryside. The rolling hills and fields should have brought me peace, but all I felt was restlessness. My mind kept circling back to Lila, her laughter, her lies, the pain in her voice when she'd said she didn't want to lose me. I pulled over at a small roadside diner, the kind of place where the coffee was always lukewarm, and the pie came in generous slices. Sliding into a booth, I ordered a black coffee and a slice of cherry pie, hoping the simple act of eating might ground me. As I stirred sugar into my coffee, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Paul. Another update. Call me when you're ready. I stared at the screen, my appetite vanishing. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what Paul had found, but I knew I couldn't keep running from the truth. After paying for my untouched pie, I stepped outside and dialed his number. Hey, he answered on the first ring. You doing okay? Define okay, I said bitterly. What's the update? Paul sighed, the sound heavy with hesitation. It's about Eric. Turns out you're not the first married woman he's gone after. He's got a pattern. Finds someone vulnerable, sweeps them off their feet, and then leaves them in ruins. One of his exes even filed a restraining order. Why am I not surprised? I muttered. Did you tell Lila any of this? No, Paul said. I figured that was your call. But Caleb, you need to be careful. Guys like Eric don't just walk away when things go south. I thanked him and hung up, leaning against my truck as the weight of it all pressed down on me. Eric wasn't just a threat to my marriage, he was a threat, period. And if Lila couldn't see that, then I had to make her see. When I got home, Lila was waiting for me in the living room. She stood as I walked in, her hands wringing nervously. I thought you weren't coming back, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm here, I replied, setting my keys on the table. But we need to talk. And this time you're going to listen. She nodded, sitting down as I remained standing, pacing the room like a caged animal. Paul found more about Eric. I began, my tone clipped. Turns out you're not his first confidant. He's got a history of manipulating women, married women. Her eyes widened, a flicker of realization crossing her face. I didn't know, she said, her voice trembling. I swear, Caleb, I didn't. I want to believe you, I said, stopping to face her. But you let him in, Lila. You let him get close. And now we're here. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she buried her face in her hands. I was stupid, she sobbed. I thought he cared. I thought he understood me. But now I see. I was just a game to him. Her words struck a chord, but they did little to ease the ache in my chest. So what now? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. What happens next? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. I'll cut him off, she said. I'll block his number, Avoid the places he goes. Whatever it takes, Caleb. I'll do anything to fix this. I wanted to believe her, to take her at her word. But trust, once broken, doesn't come back easily. This isn't just about cutting him off, I said. It's about rebuilding what you've broken. And that's not going to happen overnight. I know, she said, nodding vigorously. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't give up on me. Don't give up on us. Her plea hung in the air, raw and heartfelt. And as much as I wanted to stay angry, to hold onto the righteous fury that had kept me going, I felt it begin to crack. Because beneath the lies and the betrayal, there was still love. But was it enough? The house was silent, save for the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. Lila sat on the couch, her face pale and drawn, while I leaned against the doorframe, staring at her. The weight of everything, her betrayal, Eric's manipulation, and the wreckage of what we'd built together, pressed down on us both. I need to know why, I said finally, breaking the silence. My voice was calm, but my chest ached with the effort. Not the excuses or the deflections. I need to know the truth, Lila. Why him? Why now? She swallowed hard, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I wasn't looking for this, Caleb, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I swear. But I felt invisible, like I was just existing in your world, not ours. Eric paid attention to me. He listened. He made me feel special. I finished bitterly. She flinched but nodded. Yes, but it wasn't real. I see that now. It was just a fantasy, an escape. And I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. Her words stung, but they also carried a ring of truth I couldn't ignore. I thought back to the nights I'd worked late, the times I'd dismissed her frustrations as trivial. I wasn't excusing her choices. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be undone. But I couldn't deny that I'd played a part in the cracks that had formed between us. I'm not perfect, I said, my voice steady. And maybe I missed things. Maybe I didn't see how lonely you felt. But I never betrayed you, Lila. I never gave my attention to someone else when I should have given it to you. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she nodded, her body trembling. I know, she choked out, and I hate myself for it. But I want to fix this, Caleb. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. For a long moment I said nothing. My mind raced with conflicting emotions. Anger, sadness, love, doubt. Could we come back from this? Could I forgive her? And even if I could, would I ever truly trust her again? I don't have an answer right now, I admitted finally, the words heavy on my tongue. I don't know if we can fix this, but I'm willing to try, if you are. Her head shot up, her tear-filled eyes locking onto mine. I'll do anything, she said quickly. Therapy, counseling, whatever you need. Just don't give up on us. I nodded slowly, though the weight of my decision pressed down on me. This isn't going to be easy, I warned. And it's not going to happen overnight. If we do this, it's going to take time. And if I see even the slightest sign that you're not committed, if there's one more lie, it's over. I understand, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. And I swear, Caleb, I'll prove to you that I mean it. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. We started therapy, individual and couples, each session peeling back layers of hurt and resentment that had built up over the years. Lila cut all ties with Eric, going so far as to switch her gym and library volunteer shifts to avoid crossing paths with him. It wasn't an immediate fix. There were still moments of doubt, nights when I lay awake wondering if I was making the right choice. But there were also glimmers of hope, small moments where I caught a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with, and the life we'd built together. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lila reached for my hand. Her touch was hesitant, as if she feared I might pull away. But I didn't. Thank you, she said softly, her voice barely audible over the chirping of crickets. For what? I asked, turning to look at her. For giving me a chance, she said, tears glistening in her eyes. For not walking away. I squeezed her hand, the ache in my chest easing just slightly. Don't make me regret it, I said, my voice both a warning and a plea. I won't, she promised. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe her. And so, we began the long, slow process of rebuilding. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't without pain. But somewhere in the wreckage, we found something worth holding on to. A sliver of hope that, perhaps, we could find our way back to each other. Because love isn't just about the good times. It's about weathering the storms, surviving the mistakes, and choosing to stay even when it feels easier to leave. And for now, that was enough.